Mm-hmm.
So it's like we don't want less level.
So we'll get started in a minute. I just wanted to do a quick sound check. Just give me a thumbs up with the little reactions in the bottom if you can hear me okay, so we can troubleshoot that. Thank you. Okay. Okay, I think we'll be ready to go in about a minute. Okay, so it's a little bit, it's 9:51, so we'll go ahead and get started. This session is called Comprehensible Input for Beginning Language Learners. And my name is Robin Purdy. I am currently an ESL teacher with the Hamilton County ESC. But I spent the last 11 years as a Spanish teacher in a very rural area in Adams County. So if you could put in the chat box, just so I kind of get an idea of the audience that's here, what is it that you teach? Are you teaching English? Are you teaching a world language? Just so we can kind of have an idea. Okay, so I see lots of Spanish, ELL, speech language. Great, some German too. All right, that's great. That gives me an idea kind of for the presentation. So comprehensible input is a great thing to use with beginning language learners, whether they're learning English for survival in their content classes, or if they're learning a second language and it's only in your class period. There's lots of great strategies for comprehensible input. So let's talk about these. All right. So just a little bit of the background. It comes from Stephen Krashen's theory for second language acquisition, where he had 5 components or hypotheses. And we're going to focus on number 3 is the input, the language that the learner is receiving, and the effective filter. If the effective filter is really high, then a lot of times learners just shut down and there's no way that they can acquire language. Whereas if we have comprehensible input, that is the target language that the learner would normally not be able to produce yet, but they can understand. So it's the receptive part of the language processing versus the production. And so we're going to talk about how we can keep it comprehensible for our students so that their effective filter does not shut down, and lowers their effective filter, lowers their anxiety about learning the language. Okay, and so sometimes I refer to it as CI, just to let you know that if I use them interchangeably. Okay, there are 2 main camps of language teaching. Oops, sorry. My screen, hold on just a second. There we go. Okay. So there are 2 main camps. One is the grammar translation camp and one is the proficiency based camp. And I can tell you that I have been in both. I was taught the grammar translation where I was taught with a grammar workbook and textbook activities, conjugation activities. And so this is a more focus on form and accuracy, learning about the language that you're targeting. Versus proficiency based is a more focus on meaning and fluency, and you're learning in the target language. This is where comprehensible input comes in. We want to use the target language, whether you have English language learners that you're going to speak with them in English, or if you have a world language and you're going to be speaking with them in Spanish or German. So in the grammar translation, the grammar is the first exposure to the language. You open up and you say, we're going to talk about the preterite. These are the forms of the tense, versus, okay, maybe you introduce the students to some of the structures. And then when they have a question about the grammar, then you introduce it after they've already had the language. In my experience, the grammar translation produces students who can read and write really well. That was me from my high school class. And then I decided that I needed more practice speaking. I needed to be in an immersion setting. And So I had to, I went and did a study abroad and started really diving into more speaking. And the intercultural context is embedded in proficiency-based learning, whereas grammar translation, it's usually kind of taught as a separate component, separate subject, or like a cultural box in the textbook. But the grammar translation is usually assessments only have one right answer. It's a fill in the blank. You have to fill in the right verb with the right ending. Whereas proficiency based is more open-ended. Students can use circumlocution and kind of try to play around with the language. It's not going to be perfect, but the goal is to be understood. So, and my examples from both of these are, so I was taught with grammar translation. Then I started, once I noticed the difference when I did some immersion activities for myself, I noticed that speaking is way more practical for my students. And so I switched to proficiency-based learning. And then, for when I was teaching Spanish, and then now that I'm teaching ESL, I have to use English because I have students from a variety of backgrounds. Not everyone has the same home language. So as world language teachers, we know these are the levels, the proficiency levels from ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. And our students come in at the novice level, using that they have to use memorized materials, memorize words, phrases, simple sentences. And then in the intermediate is when they can start creating with the language. So the hard part is that comprehensible input kind of addresses that our students can think about complex concepts without necessarily being able to relay that information or produce that information. So that's what comprehensible input comes in to make sure. Now keep in mind that students should not be expected. This kind of helps us put out realistic expectations for our language learners. But if our students are not expected to narrate and describe in the past, present, and future until they're advanced, and that is a lot of language if you look at the cone that is required to be able to get to that level. So basically what our comprehensible input needs to do is to bring those structures, past, present, and future, down, and so that kids are exposed to them, so that you can shelter the vocabulary, but not necessarily the grammatical structures. And then that way, when the students are able to kind of dig more into the grammar, then they'll be more prepared for that, and more, it'll kind of sound right, I guess, from the comprehensible input that they've heard. And then they can dig more into the details, the linguistic details. Okay, so just real quick, are there any questions about what comprehensible input is before we get into strategies? This recording is also, this session is also being recorded, and they told me that I could share the link, and then they would put it in the Padlet for you guys later, that you could watch it if you needed to. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some strategies. One of the most common, I would say, myths is that comprehensible input is just one strategy. And in reality, it is a lot of strategies. So I'm going to just go over a few examples of these. Some of you, you might have already heard of some of these phrases. So comprehensible input is an umbrella that covers things like embedded reading. And embedded reading is where you have typically 3 different versions of the same reading. And you start off reading the simplest form with the students. Once they get the main idea, then you go to the next advanced, and then you go to the third and then the student is practically reading whatever article it was, or the reading very close to the authentic reading. And TPR, total physical response, uses gestures paired with the words so that students are can act out the words even if they don't know how to respond in the language. Reader's theater is reading a story, narrating, and then having the students act out the parts. Read and discuss is very straightforward. Content-based instruction is what our ELLs are working in. They are trying to learn the content through their next language, their second language, additional language. We have movie talk and picture talk, which I'm going to talk about. Those are one of my favorites. And TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. This is where students have access to class novels. They can read stories and practice telling stories about things that they have discussed in class. PQA, personalized questions and answers. I have some examples for those, but basically the topic is going to revolve around the student responses. And listen and draw. I have a couple examples of those too. The teacher will narrate as the students draw to show their comprehension. And if you look on the other side, this is another infographic with some ideas for teaching to the eyes. Is really common for language teachers to make sure that they're paying attention, but also that they're not feeling completely lost, and making sure that you slow down, rephrase, simplify the sentences, shelter the vocabulary, keep the vocabulary to words that they have already practiced. I use contrast meaning a lot for my circumlocution to be able to say, well, the topic that I'm talking about is this, and it's the opposite of this, kind of adding some comparisons in there. Pop-up grammar is just asking when students have a question about grammar, that they're curious about it, and then that way you are presenting the grammar that they want and that they need at that moment, instead of just flat out having a grammar class. Facial expressions is really hard right now with masks. I know that my family says I am very expressive when it comes to charades and Pictionary, and so that would be gestures and illustrate, just because that's what you have to do as part of the job. Sound effects, props, personalize, connect the meaning to their first language as well. There are all kinds of ways. So there's not just one way to have comprehensible input. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. Okay, you've probably heard of the I+1, where the I is the current level of competence, and Krashen says that second language acquisition takes place when your L2 is one step beyond what you're currently able to do. So for example, I is what you're currently able to do, and then I+1. So even beginners can pick up I+1 as long as it is kept very low and not I+10, because that's when our students, our effective filters, raise up really high, and we don't really have good results with our students. So comprehensible input is regular, constant, understandable, target language. So let's go into a couple examples. This is what personalized questions and answers may look like. I like to use a lot of visuals with mine. So for example, a lot of yes or no questions that students can answer, but yet they're understanding and hearing more of the target language, but their production is kind of minimized for the time being. Another thing I like is, so this is what do you like more? And so I could ask students, well, what do you like more, to go to the theater or go to the movie theater? And then they can see the pictures and they can see the words. And so then they can just respond with the correct word. And then I can go on and talk about, I can use cognates, maybe the name of a theater that students know. or maybe the name of a movie, the name of a play, something that I can ask that they like to see. If I want to say, you know, if one student says that they like to go to the circus more, I can use animals and say, okay, do you like to go to the circus to see the elephants? Do you like to go to the circus to see the tigers? And those are cognates in Spanish that I can use. Or I can use visuals as well. Or sometimes I make like a gesture, like an elephant or a tiger or something like that. And then what you can do is, so this is what personalized questions and answers does. It just completely circles around the conversation that you're having with the students. And so then you can create several several sentences that would say, you know, this student likes to go to the circus, or this student likes to go to the theater and watch such and such play. And so then you can have students raise their hand if the statements are false, and kind of review the content that you've talked about in class for that time. Another way to use personalized questions and answers is to have both visuals again. This is a song called Tengo Tu Love, and this is by Martina Beck's an activity. So she took, the whole idea is that comparing things that cost a lot to things that don't cost a lot. So a jacuzzi versus like a little beach house, or time versus a Rolex. So there are lots of cognates that you can use, como, like jacuzzi, but there are also lots of name brand things that you can use, Evian, Rolex, and you can add the photos just in case they're not familiar with it as well. So this is asking students, and we kind of had a conversation, which do you prefer more? Some people prefer to go for the higher, the fancier and more elegant, but some people in my class preferred to go for the little. So it just was a conversation, and why, and even if the student can't produce it and they produce it in their first language, then I can change it for the class, and then we can go on, and then people can still understand. So and we had a funny conversation over who needed the more elegant items as well. So I think I have another slide for this song. Another activity is the Cloze activity. And so this is the song Tengo Tu Love. And basically students were already introduced to the visuals earlier, and the pairs that were compared. You'll see Jet Privado, Versace, lots of Mariah Carey, Justin Bieber's in there. There's already lots of things that students can understand. And then you're having them leave a blank, and for them to focus on listening to the song and trying to pick out just a word that is in there. And most of it is I have, but some of the words over here, and then this is like kind of an example of being able to say, okay, he sings, he dances, he has, and so working on those verbs and then trying to put them in as you listen to the song. So again, another way that students are just a little bit above their level of competence, but not too far, so that way their effective filter is not too high. Okay, one of my favorite things to do is a movie talk. And basically what I do is I take screenshots of the video, and then of a target language video. It's the Spanish might be too far above. It's not I+1. And then I write out my own narrative to go with it. So this is a commercial about a cactus with marshmallows on the thorns. And so I would read this. It says, the girl gives the marshmallow to the cactus. I went ahead and just put that word in there because we hadn't covered it yet. So I needed to make it comprehensible. But everything else is pretty repetitive. I just keep circling with the same vocabulary. So he puts the marshmallow on the cactus wants to eat the marshmallow, but de repente means all of a sudden. And so I have my students a little bit of TPR. Whenever they hear de repente, they snap really fast. He has a fabulous idea. So this whole video was only, after we do the movie talk, I let them watch the video. It's only about 30 seconds. It's just an ad. And so I take this and turn it into a 2-day lesson. And then after that, we use other vocabulary of what using the word quiere for he wants. Infographics are a great way to help our students be able to understand the content as well, especially with really good visuals. So this is for Day of the Dead that's coming up. And I particularly like this infographic because of the visuals that it has. It zooms in, and then it has the color coding as well, which is also very helpful for our comprehensible input. And so there's a title, which kind of like names the item, and then underneath it says, for why is it used? And so this is the words that that my students can pick out. They can pick out water. So they may not know a cup of water, but they can kind of take a guess from the context. This is bread for pan. Flores, if they don't know the word for flores, they see a picture of the flores that has the colors in there. Papel. So this is one of those things that you could have students say, tell me what is the main idea, what are a few details, and even just for comprehensible input, ask them, what is something that you want me to explain or translate for you that you didn't understand? So I think it's important that our students know that we need the main idea and some details, and that it's okay if we don't understand everything, kind of being comfortable with not knowing exactly everything, but getting the general idea. Okay, so another example is to use picture talk as well, which is very similar to movie talk. And so this is What the World Eats in 1 Week. It's a photo series by Peter Menzel. He has a book, and you can also get the pictures online as well from time.com. And this is a picture of a family in Ecuador and what they eat for 1 week. So they put all the food out there and the family. There's so much context to use in this picture. I first start by having students just name what do they see. And so they can name food items, they can name colors, maybe clothing items, boy, girl, happy, maybe home. And then I do this with like at least 2 or 3 from different countries. And then we can also give them the sentence starter, like more or less, or, and then we can say, okay, in Ecuador, they eat more potatoes than the family in Mexico. And so you can start to kind of build the language so that way students get that repetitive practice, but yet they're understanding a lot of things that you are talking about because you're pointing it out as they go through the visual. And the more time you spend with a picture, the more things that they start to notice in the background and things like that. Okay, another way to use the visuals as well is taking screenshots again from the movie Coco. And so this one is a prediction of what is going to be the correct order. So you could use this at the beginning of the, like kind of like a pre-reading activity. And you're talking about different activities, and then the students just write down their numbers. And then you can go in and explain about the numbers. Oh, so you think that this is going to happen before this, and you add the language that goes along with the ideas that they come up with. Another thing that I've used this screen for is for listen and draw. So at the end of a movie talk, and let's say I want to check their comprehension, so I will give them a sentence and then they just have to write down the number that they think I'm describing. So I might say, let's see. I might say, Mama Imelda gives a flower petal to Miguel. So that would be number 9. And they would just write down number 9. I've also done it where students do not see the screen. And so they have to just draw a quick little sketch and I tell them stick people are fine. I'm just checking your comprehension, just so that way I know that you're understanding what I'm saying. Because with comprehensible input, it is very important that you constantly check in with the students, because you don't want them to get lost. You don't want them to keep going. It's very important to have a good trust relationship with the teacher and the student, to make sure that the student is only at I+1 and not too far. So that's something to keep in mind, to always check for comprehension. Okay, so on social media, also you can use a lot of screenshots. This one I used in my last presentation on Twitter and Instagram in the classroom. So the bonus is that students already are familiar with these social media platforms, and so they can see that there are 10 retweets, and they know the symbols, and they know where to look for things. So this is a presentation that I had done a long time ago, Tweets for Teachers. But for this one, I used questions like, what words can you pick out? And so they could pick out today, beach. They could notice all of the weather symbols. They see people are smiling. So we talk about, is it a positive or negative? They could figure out that somebody is eating something because they're all surrounded, the family. And then I asked them, what is the date? And so when we looked at the top of the date, it was actually January 12th. Well, for students in Ohio, January 12th is not a time that you go to the beach, and especially don't eat outside. So we clicked on the handle and found out that it was a user in Argentina. And so then we had a discussion about the opposite seasons and what it would be like to have Christmas at the beach. And so, but the great thing is that, like I said, students already know the context. They're already familiar with what is going on in the picture, more or less. And they can kind of piece the pieces together. So social media is a great way to make or to post things that are input that is comprehensible for students. So another example is an illustrated talk. This is where as I'm drawing, I start with myself, and I draw up and explain my mom and dad. I use hearts to explain who is married to each other. Vertical lines are offspring, and I explain all of these things in relationship to me. So this is my sister and my brother-in-law, my brother and my sister-in-law, and my grandparents. And so the first time when I do this, I illustrate it, I draw it on the board. So I draw each one as I go. And very simplified drawings. But then I have this to be able to show students afterwards. They always seem interested in what your real family looks like. And so then I have questions about this. So what is my dad's brother's name? What is my mom's name? Or what is my dad's mom's name? And they like to see that my name, Robin, came from Roberta. So just being able to, as you explain, also have an illustration and some kind of visual connection is very helpful for our language learners. And your drawings do not have to be perfect. Another example is, I think most people have probably heard of EdPuzzle or PlayPosit. They do the same thing. This is a really good idea for a video that you have that you really want the students to focus on a certain section. So you pause, you ask a question. You can have it where it gives you the answer. That way the student is not confused going forward. Or I mean, you can have it so that it's more like a quiz for you, but for the objectives of comprehensible input, the student needs to make sure that it's kind of like you checking in if they understand it. So this was like I just rewrote a quote from the video and then asked them what another word could be for one of the options for the word andaba. And so you can put in the stops wherever you want, and then that way it automatically pauses for the student until they answer the question, and they can rewatch the section too. So if they need something like if they need extra attention on a section or something, like you can deliberately, strategically put those pauses in there. Okay, and another example is Flipgrid. So I used, went on a Fulbright exchange to Morocco, and when I was there, my students created videos. This is the food board, I think. Yeah, so they have popcorn and Cheez-Its and fast food and things like that. But so I made a board, and you can go in and check it. It has a passcode, salam to you. But my students then could use their own visuals because they were, my Spanish learning students were going to communicate in English with other students in Morocco who were learning English, and they were going to share their culture. So the students had to make sure that they used visuals, make sure that they could explain things. And so the topic of food helped narrow down to make the comprehensible input. And then my students also used their props. And then to be able to understand it, the other students could rewind and keep replaying it as much as they needed, or send a comment or ask for negotiation of meaning, just to make sure that they understood. So this was a great exchange that we had. And Flipgrid makes it very simple, very easy to access. Okay, so finished a little bit early. I just wanted to make sure that there's enough time for questions too. The easiest way to reach me is through my email. I'm also on Twitter, and on YouTube I have some videos that have some of my comprehensible input, like TPR, and you can see some examples of what my Spanish classroom looked like, and now what I'm doing with ESL. So I wanted to leave it open for questions. You can put it in the chat box. You can unmute. Anything. I am here for you until 10:40, I think. Anybody have any concerns about teaching with comprehensible input? So I teach newcomers and intermediates for English language. When I taught Spanish, I taught mostly novice. Sure. So balancing comprehensible with input with authentic resources, and how do you do both? So basically, I think I just have to make sure what is the key vocabulary and what is the vocabulary that my students know. I have to constantly keep going back and forth to make sure that I'm not going too far above their level. But I also think that you have to pick your authentic resources. For novices, they need more visuals. For intermediates, they can handle longer text sections. So But also, I think it's important that you don't have to use the whole authentic resource. If it's an audio authentic resource, EdPuzzle can help you break down some of the things, and even just asking things like, is this a positive or a negative tweet? I mean, that is something that they can just look at the extra context. So I'd say like simplifying it, but also making sure that you include the main idea. That's probably how I assess both. What assessments I use? I do a lot of listen and draw. I do usually for comprehensible input. I also have formative assessments that when I do a movie talk, every probably 3 or 4 slides, I have a slide of just questions, and it is either or. So I'll say, okay, who is happy in this video, this person or this person? And all they have to do is answer the name. Or if I say who or what, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, like, but just giving either or examples, or so that way they can respond. I know they've understood, but they didn't have to repeat all of or memorize all of the language that I had already used before. I'm trying to think of other assessments that I've used. Even just a quick exit slip of, you know, a retell. So retell what happened in the video clip today. And so you can write, and if they can't write everything in the target language, I let them put it in English. But usually it ends up being like a mix of Spanglish. So any other questions? So in my grade book, I have listening, reading, writing, speaking, and mostly with comprehensible input when I'm starting out, it's going to be mostly a listening or a reading grade. And so those are going to be the start, and then the production with the language is going to come later, because I'm just trying to make sure that they understand before we go on and add more language. So those are my grading categories. And then I usually start with, I'll have a comprehension check, and that is just unannounced. I just want to see kind of like a formative assessment. And so I have those typically maybe a day or two after we've started a unit, just to kind of check in. Students know that those don't always go in the grade book if the class isn't ready for it yet. But I use those to kind of judge for myself if the students are ready to move on or add more language yet. And then after that, then my students are able to do more of the speaking and the writing. I hope that answers your question about assessments. But most of the assessments that I completely make them up. So do I use a rubric? I use a rubric from ACTFL. It's an appendix that that was adopted by ODE, and I use that for the interpretive. So when I'm wanting students to figure out like an infographic or the main idea, I'm checking for the main idea, some details, and that is broken down by proficiency level, and I use that according to how far in the year they are and what their expectation is to make it more realistic. I think one of the biggest issues is that students think that they have to have the same proficiency in their first language as they do in their second language, which is not going to happen because of the amount of input that you have to have from your first language. It's just going to be more, naturally more. So I use that rubric, and let me see if I can find it. All right, I'm going to post a link in the chat box about the rubric that I was talking about. Okay, so if that is all, thank you so much for coming to this presentation, and feel free to contact me, email, Twitter, anything that you need afterwards, and continue the conversation.